He couldn't breathe. The dragon's foul breath poisoned the air. The heat radiating from his body was intense. His hands went limp. He nearly dropped the wand and clutched at it in growing panic. As he did so, he felt its power throb in his hand. The wand glowed with a vibrant blue intensity. Kang was terrified. He debated running from the chamber and its fiery occupant. Staying would surely spell disaster for the draconian, but leaving would spell disaster for all of Krynn. This thought gave Kang strength. He had to give it a shot. Standing his ground, he faced the fire dragon. The fiery head loomed over him, and even as he faced this single, dreadful, deadly dragon, without a hope of destroying it, without a hope of surviving, Kang saw a group of dwarves emerge from an opening in the upper part of the chamber. On the faces of the dwarves was a terror that must mimic his own. The dragon's head lowered, drew nearer. Its eyes were focused on Kang. The eyes were empty. They held nothing, not hate, not hunger, not fear. The dragon would kill him. It would watch Kang die without feeling anything. This dragon's only goal was to destroy any living thing that it found in its path. Fire flickered from its closed jaws. The teeth were black against the glow of the flame. The head grew nearer still. The jaws moved open. The heat was taking its toll. Kang fumbled at the magical spells in his heat-dazed mind. He was growing limp as a lizard basking in the sun. He had to do something to fight the heat before he could even begin to battle the dragon. The first spell he cast, therefore, was for himself. "Water, your majesty, I beg you," Kang mumbled through a throat that was burned and parched. His clawed hands traced the requisite symbol on the wall behind him. The wand flared blue in his hand. Power irradiated the wand, startling Kang so much that he almost dropped it. Water, ice cold and wonderful, splashed down on Kang. It gushed in a torrent from the ceiling. It ran down the floor, cascaded into the pit. Steam rose in clouds. Shaking off the lethargy that had almost been lethal, Kang sloshed about in the water, tried desperately to think of his next spell, a spell that would kill the dragon. The water continued to pour down. The chamber was filling with steam. Kang momentarily lost sight of the fiery creature, but he could hear it roar, and it sounded as if it was in pain. A torrent of water was washing over the dragon. Its scales, constricting from the heat, were cracking. The dragon's red glow was dimming. It roared again in fury. Its claws scraped against the rock. The top portion of the body was growing heavy. The bottom could no longer support it. The dragon was retreating, sinking back into the pit. Kang panted in relief that was short-lived. As far as he knew, the one way out was through this chamber. If he allowed the dragon to escape now, it would probably revive. He would only have to fight it later. He had to prevent it from escaping back into its lair. "Mud," Kang said, looking up at the ceiling. "I beg your majesty." The wand flared blue. The stone ceiling of the cavern above the dragon transformed, oozed, and liquid. An avalanche of mud descended upon the dragon, completely covering its upper body and head. The dragon's tail thrashed up from the pit, flicking molten lava about the walls. But soon the tail went flaccid. Kang could only assume the dragon was dead. Kang sucked in a shuddering breath. He was about to leave when the floor and the walls started to shiver. The shifting mud could no longer hold the weight of the ceiling above it. This part of the chamber was going to come crashing down on top of it. Kang started running toward the exit, the way he'd entered, only to see it vanish in a sliding wall of mud, rock that would soon overtake him. He was about to suffer the same fate as the dragon. Turning, Kang ran the only way he could run, farther and deeper in the chamber. He could not see for the steam, but he recalled that he had seen an exit at the chamber's far end. It was a long distance away, and to reach it, he had to pass near the fiery pit. Kang ran faster than he'd ever run in his life, his feet sloshing through the water. The floor sloped uphill. The water was shallower here. And then he was on dry stone, hot stone. He gritted his teeth against the pain of his burned and blistered feet and kept running. He was circling around the pit, giving it a wide berth when he caught a glimpse of movement, of the rock within, heaving and rolling toward the surface. Eyes, black and empty, stared from the pit. The dwarves took a few tentative steps inside the chamber. The heat was oppressive, the fumes stifling. The dwarves fell back against the cavern's smooth walls and crept along the edges. Heat boiled out of the pit. A sense of dread wrung the courage from every dwarf. They gripped their battle axes and continued on. They had taken 20 steps and were still some distance from the exit when a terrible bellow sounded from the opposite side of the chamber. The dwarves halted, stared at each other. "That was a draconian's voice," cried Pestle. "First a grell, then a fire pit, now a howling draconian," Selquist muttered. "Look, off to the right," Mortar was shouting. Selquist looked, but an enormous stalactite blocked his view. The draconian bellowed again, shouting words in a tongue that none of them understood. This was followed by a flash of bright, unnatural blue light and the sound of rushing water coming from off to their right, on the other side of the lava pit. The dwarves weren't about to hang around and see what came next. They broke into a run. They were almost halfway to their goal when their goal suddenly vanished in a cloud of hot steam. Everything vanished in the thick fog, including each other. "Stand still!" Selquist yelled. "Keep together!" But the dwarves ignored him. They stumbled about in the fog, each shouting and groping with his hands, endeavoring to find a way out. Adding to the fear and confusion were the terrible noises coming from out of the fog, noises of a draconian shouting and a frightful hissing and roaring. The fog began to dissipate. Finally able to see, the dwarves discovered that they were scattered all over the chamber, some perilously close to falling in the pit. At that moment, the floor and the walls started to shake. The sound of an avalanche thundered to their right. The cavern was caving in. The dwarves headed once more for the exit, with Selquist in the lead. A shout behind him caused him to turn his head. A dwarf stood in front of the glowing pit. He appeared to have turned to solid rock, for he wasn't moving, and something inside the pit was. A head of flame and smoke, with eyes as empty as eternity, surged upward. Selquist had never seen a dragon before, much less a dragon made of fire, but he was immediately able to identify this creature as a fire dragon. The one thing he knew about fire dragons was that he should not remain long in the vicinity of one. The dragon shot a mouthful of flame on the dwarf, who was instantly ablaze. Screaming in agony, the dwarf flailed about, took a misstep, and tumbled with a horrible shriek into the pit of molten lava. Dread and awe rendered Selquist and all the rest of the dwarves incapable of movement or thought. Another one of their number became a living torch. The beast was pulling itself out of the pit, its head swiveling to keep its victims in sight. Selquist snapped out of it, endeavored to rouse his friends. "Augur, run! Pestle, you idiot, get away from there! Mortar, you moron, run!" The empty black eyes focused on Velmer, who stood shivering in his boots. His battle axe fell to the floor, struck the rock with a dull clang. The dragon drew in a breath. Mortar hurled his axe at the dragon, but struck the beast in the left eye. The dragon thrashed about, flinging its head from side to side. The eye was a bloody mass, oozing down the dragon's cheek. Encouraged, the other dwarves threw their axes, and anything else they held, at the fire dragon. When they ran out of weapons to throw at the dragon, they hurled rocks, water skins, and even their own hobnailed boots. Stunned by the barrage, the dragon started to sag to the floor, but it wasn't finished yet. Shaking its fiery mane, it swiveled its good eye around to find and destroy these annoying pests. "Retreat!" Selquist shouted when it was apparent that they had nothing more to throw. The dwarves turned and fled. The dragon made a sudden surge forward, flame rumbling from his jaws. A draconian ran forward, emerging from out of the red-tinged darkness, chanting his war cry as he ran. He held a gleaming wand in one hand, his sword in the other, and his breast and head were protected by a coat of sparkling white frost that glittered like armor. The draconian's war cry was picked up and shouted by other draconians, coming to the aid of their commander. The first draconian ran in, ducked beneath the teeth, and snapped at it. The magical frost armor began to melt in the terrible heat, but it protected the draconian long enough for him to drive his sword straight into the beast's right eye. The dragon flung its head sideways, attempting to dislodge the sword. The draconian held on, driving the sword deeper, until it seemed he was about to be carried into the burning pit. Letting go at the last possible moment, he fell heavily to the floor. The dragon opened its jaws and was about to devour him when the rest of the draconians arrived and formed a defensive perimeter around their fallen leader. One of them grabbed the big draconian and dragged him away from the pit. "Now!" Mortar shouted. With a few of the others, he ran back to rescue those dwarves who had fallen, assisting them to safety. Draconian swords flashed in the red light, stabbing and thrusting. The dragon lurched its head upward and lashed out with its powerful claws. A swipe caught one of the Bozaks in the back, impaling him. The Bozak struggled a moment, then went limp. "Take cover!" Selquist cried. He knew what was coming. "Duck, everyone!" The draconians also began to take cover, scuttling back for the entrance. The draconian who carried the wand crawled on his hands and knees in the opposite direction. The Bozak's flesh crumbled, leaving a skeleton. The dragon was endeavoring to shake the skeletal remains from its claw when the bones exploded. The dragon's head burst asunder. Fire erupted from its skull. It tumbled into the pit. "Fiery arcs! There's more of them!" Mortar cried in dismay. The magma in the pit churned. Red waves of fire crashed on the rock shore. "There must be hundreds," Pestle gasped. Standing in the exit, Selquist motioned, yelled, "Down the tunnel, this way, quickly now! Have those beasties cleaned out by the time we're ready to come back, will you?" he yelled to the draconians. The dwarves helped the wounded to their feet and headed down the tunnel that was, finally, going to lead them to the treasure. Selquist was about to chase after them when a thought occurred to him. Mortar! Pestle! Wait here with me just a minute, he called. I have an idea. Kang lay face down, staring with horror into the bubbling magma. If these creatures escaped, they would not only overrun Thorbidin, they would decimate Kryn. This, he realized slowly, is the Dark Queen's task for us. Not to kill one or two of the fire dragons, to destroy the whole nest. She never intended for us to survive this mission, Kang realized. We are her Doom Brigade, like the fabled knights who rode in the last battle with... what's his name? Kang couldn't think clearly. Sir! Sir! A voice was yelling at him. Commander! Water splashed at him. It sizzled on its hot scales, but it brought him back to consciousness. A clawed hand had grabbed him by the harness, dragged him back away from the pit, and dumped him on the floor. You just rest here, sir. We'll deal with these worms. Slith was off before Kang could reply, returning to the battle. The dragon impaled a Bozak in its claw. Kang saw the Bozak die. He had just strength enough left to crawl out of the way before the explosion. The fire dragon died. The head of another reared up to take its place. Kang heard a second explosion. Another Bozak dead. How could they fight a creature they couldn't even get close enough to without sizzling? He sat on the floor, gazing around at nothing, a strange and terrible lethargy affecting him. He was waiting to die. His aimless gaze lifted to the cavern's enormous domed ceiling. Stalactites made of rock melted by the heat looked like enormous teeth. Once black, the stalactites glistened red in the light of the fire. Kang might have been inside a maw of some giant creature, whose mouth was filled with fangs. A mouth about to close on them all. That's it, said Kang. He was on his feet, the lethargy gone. He found Slith, fighting some distance away.